This is the story of a gentle woman, a mother whose heart beat only for her child, a woman who gave everything she had, every piece of herself, to make sure her daughter never went without. Her name was Margaret, and her daughter's name was April. At 62 years old, Margaret lived a simple, quiet life, but her joy came from one source: April. Her daughter wasn't just a part of her life. April was her life. From the day she was born, Margaret had poured her strength, her love, and her sacrifice into raising her. April was her only child, the one blessing she thanked God for every morning. And now Margaret's heart was beating faster than it had in years, because she believed she was about to step into one of the happiest moments of her life. But what she didn't know, what waited for her at the end of that long 600-mile drive, was a truth so painful it would leave scars she could never erase. Believe me when I say this, you cannot walk away from what's about to unfold. This isn't just another family story. This is a tale heavy with love, with sacrifice, and with heartbreak so sharp it will make you stop and think about the people in your own life. So settle in, maybe grab your favorite snack, because once you begin this journey, you won't want to press pause. And if this is your first time here, I'd be grateful if you hit that subscribe button, tap the notification bell, and if this story touches your heart even a little, show some love with a like. Margaret closed the trunk of her old, faithful car. She had only packed a small weekend bag, just enough for 2 nights. But her most precious gift wasn't in the trunk. It was on the passenger seat, carefully wrapped in soft yellow paper and tied with a big white bow. Inside was a baby blanket, her gift for her first grandchild. She had spent 2 long months knitting that blanket stitch by stitch, her fingers stiff and aching from age, but her heart overflowing with love. She had worked late into the night, praying for her grandbaby with each loop of yarn. The blanket was the softest thing she had ever made, bright and warm like a sunrise. She could already imagine a little baby girl wrapped snugly in it, safe and warm in her arms. The road stretched ahead, 600 miles of fields, highways, and small towns, but Margaret didn't mind. Every mile carried her closer to April, closer to the celebration she couldn't miss. April's baby shower was today. Margaret hadn't been invited, but she didn't let that stop her. "It's just a small thing, Mom," April had said on the phone a week earlier. "Just a few co-workers. You don't need to make such a big trip." But Margaret knew better. She knew her own heart, and she knew that no distance, no words, could keep her away from the joy of celebrating her first grandchild. She planned a surprise. She would show up with her gift, her love, and wrap her daughter in the hug only a mother could give. She turned on the radio, humming along to the old songs she had loved for decades. Her voice cracked a little, but she didn't care. She sang with joy. All she could picture was the look on April's face when she saw her walk through the door. Still, a little worry tugged at her heart. She had called April earlier that morning, just to hear her voice, but the call went straight to voicemail. She sent a message. "Thinking of you today, my sweet girl. Love, Mom." Hours later, there was still no reply. Margaret brushed the thought away. "She's busy," she told herself. "She's busy with her friends and the party. Once she sees me, she'll forget all about her phone." Lately, April had seemed different. Her calls were shorter, her messages fewer, sometimes only 1 or 2 words. Margaret told herself it was the stress of work and the pregnancy. April had just been promoted to manager at a large company, and Margaret was so proud. She had even helped April buy her dream home, the house where this very party was happening. Margaret thought back to the day at the bank. April had been nervous when the banker frowned at her papers. "Your income is strong, Miss Thompson, but this mortgage is too large for your credit history." April's face had fallen, but Margaret had taken her hand and smiled. "I'll co-sign," she had said without hesitation. "I'll be the guarantor." Her own home had been paid off for years, her credit flawless, She had worked her whole life, paying every bill on time, saving what little she could. All of it she offered to April. She wanted her daughter to have a safe, beautiful home to raise her child. And oh, what a home it was. 5 bedrooms, wide. Backyard, perfect for a child to run and play. Margaret had only seen pictures, but today, finally, she would see it with her own eyes. By the time she turned onto April's street, the sun was setting. The houses were like palaces, with perfect lawns and gleaming cars parked in their driveways. She spotted April's place immediately. Pink and blue balloons tied to the mailbox, laughter and music spilling out of open windows. Cars lined the street, expensive cars, the kind Margaret had only ever admired from a distance. Her heart raced. She parked her old car a little down the road so as not to block anyone. She checked her reflection in the mirror. Her best church dress, soft blue with little flowers, neat hair pulled back. She looked like a grandmother. She looked like herself. She picked up the blanket, her most precious gift, and walked slowly up the long stone walkway. Her heart swelled like a balloon, almost too big for her chest. Through the wide windows she saw women in silk dresses, men in crisp shirts, glasses of champagne in their hands. Their laughter rang out, polished and perfect. For a second, Margaret felt small, but then she looked down at her gift, at the blanket she had poured her love into, and she felt proud again. She pressed the doorbell. The cheerful chime rang inside, and the laughter paused. Footsteps approached. Her smile widened until it hurt. The door opened, and there was April. But the expression on her daughter's face wasn't joy. It wasn't surprise. It was horror. Her perfectly made-up face went pale, her eyes wide, not with happiness, but with anger. She looked at Margaret, then quickly back over her shoulder at the glittering crowd inside. "Mother," she hissed, her voice low and sharp. "What are you doing here?" Margaret's smile trembled but held. "I came to surprise you, my sweet girl," she said softly, holding out the gift. "For the baby. I brought something special." But April didn't look at the gift. Her eyes scanned Margaret's simple dress, her worn shoes, her kind face. Her expression hardened. She stepped outside, blocking the view from the guests. "You can't be here," she whispered harshly. "You'll embarrass me. Look at you. Just look at you. My fiancé's parents are here. My boss is here. These people won't understand someone like you." The words hit Margaret like stones. "People like me," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper, her heart balloon collapsing into sharp pieces of pain. "April, I am your mother, and I am asking you to leave." April cut her off, louder this time, her panic rising as guests inside began, glancing toward the door. A tall man in a fine suit, her fiancé, began walking toward them. April's voice turned sharp, cold, desperate. "I will not let you ruin this for me." Tears filled Margaret's eyes. She clutched the blanket tighter. "But the baby," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I made this blanket." April's face twisted, her patience gone. She turned her head and shouted toward the end of the driveway. "Security! Security!" Margaret froze in place. Her own daughter, her April, was calling security on her. Tall man in a black uniform came striding toward the porch. His face was firm, serious. April pointed at her mother. "This woman isn't invited," she said coldly, not even looking at Margaret. "She's harassing my guests. I want her removed." The guard turned toward Margaret. His expression wasn't cruel, but it was steady, professional. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" he asked April. "Yes," April said, her voice sharp as glass. "This woman is not invited. She is harassing my guests. I want her removed." The guard turned to Margaret. His face was not mean, but it was firm. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gentle, but leaving no room for argument. "You heard the lady. You have to leave the property now." Margaret could not speak. The tears were now flowing freely down her cheeks. She looked at her daughter one last time, searching her face for any sign of the girl she loved. But there was nothing, only cold, hard shame. As the guard gently took her arm to lead her away, her hands went numb. The yellow-wrapped gift, the soft blanket made with 2 months of love, slipped from her fingers. It fell onto the cold stone steps with a soft, sad thud. The guard led her down the walkway, past the fancy cars, past the pink and blue balloons that now seemed to be mocking her. She did not look back. She could not bear to see April step over the gift to go back to her perfect party. She reached her old reliable car and fumbled for her keys. Her hands were shaking too much to find the lock. She leaned against the car, the whole world spinning around her. The music and laughter from the house seemed to be getting louder and louder, a cruel celebration of her heartbreak. Her mind was empty, a wasteland of pain and confusion. But then, as she stood there under the darkening sky, one clear thought cut through the fog. A thought about a promise, a signature, and Avery, very large loan on a beautiful 5-bedroomed room house. And for the first time that day, a new feeling began to stir in her heart, right beside the pain. It was a cold, hard feeling, the feeling of justice. The drive home was a blur of darkness and tears. The 600-meter, the drive home that had felt like an exciting adventure on the way there, now felt like a long, painful punishment. Margaret drove in. Silence. The radio was off. The happy songs she had sung just that morning felt like they belonged to a different person to a lifetime ago. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the quiet sobs that escaped her lips from time to time. Her old car, her faithful friend, carried her away from the city lights and back toward the quiet comfort of her own life. But she knew that comfort was broken. Something inside her was shattered, and she did not know if it could ever be put back together. Every few miles, the scene at the door would play again in her head. April's face twisted with anger and shame. Her words, "You will embarrass me," echoed in the empty car. The way her daughter had looked at her simple dress, the dress she had thought was so nice. The way she'd shouted for security. Margaret's own mother, who had passed away many years ago, had always told her, "A child's disrespect is the sharpest thorn a mother can feel." Tonight Margaret felt that thorn buried deep in her heart. She was not just hurt, she was wounded. The worst part was the blanket. She could see it so clearly, lying on the cold stone steps. The soft yellow yarn she had chosen with so much care. The thousands of tiny stitches she'd poured her love into, left on the ground like a piece of trash. A gift for a grandchild she was not good enough to meet. A grandchild who would be raised in a big fancy house by a woman who was ashamed of her own mother. The thought made a fresh wave of tears run down her tired face. She had to pull over at a rest stop because she could not see the road anymore. She sat in the dark parking lot surrounded by sleeping trucks and let herself cry. She cried for the daughter she had lost. She cried for the grandmother she would never get to be. But as she sat there, something began to change. The deep, heavy sadness started to mix with something else. It was a cold, quiet anger. It was not a loud, screaming anger, but a deep, steady fire starting to burn where her heart used to be. April had called her an embarrassment. April had used her. She had used her mother's good name and perfect credit to build this big, shiny life, and then tried to hide her mother away like a dirty secret. Margaret had worked at the local diner for 40 years. 40 years of standing on her feet, of being kind to strangers, of saving every penny she could. She had done it all for April. She had built a life of honesty and hard work, and that was the very thing April was now ashamed of. "People like you," April had said. What did that mean? People who work hard. People who love their children. People who knit blankets with their own hands instead of buying them from a fancy store. Margaret wiped her tears with the back of her hand. Her crying was done. The drive was long, and it gave her time to think. The more she thought, the clearer things became. Love was a two-way street. Respect was a two-way street. You could not take and take and take, and give only shame in return. By the time the sun began to rise, casting a soft gray light over the fields of her home state, Margaret knew what she had to do. It was not about revenge, it was about respect. It was about taking back the part of herself that April had tried to throw away. She arrived home just after dawn. Her little house was quiet and peaceful. It was small, but it was hers. Every inch of it was paid for. She walked inside, and the familiar smell of her home wrapped around her like a hug. It smelled of old books and lemon polish. For a moment, she felt the sadness return. This was the home she had raised April in. There were pictures on the wall of a smiling little girl with the home pigtails, a happy girl who loved her mother more than anything in the world. Where did that little girl go? Margaret sighed. A deep, heavy sound that filled the quiet house. She went to the kitchen and put the kettle on to make tea. The simple, everyday action helped to calm her nerves. While the water was heating, she went to the small wooden desk in her living room. It was where she kept all her important papers. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a thick folder. Inside, neat and organized, was all the paperwork for April's mortgage. She spread the papers out on her dining table. There it was, in black and white, the huge number, the address of the big fancy house, and at the bottom of several pages, 2 signatures. April's fancy loopy signature and her own simple and clear Margaret. She looked at her name on that paper, guarantor. The word seemed tossed and out. It meant she was a guarantee, a promise. She had promised the bank that if April ever failed, she would be there to make it right. She had been April's safety net. She had looked at the papers and realized a hard truth. April had not built her new life on her own success. She had built it on Margaret's lifetime of hard work. The bank had not trusted April alone. They'd trusted Margaret. The kettle whistled and she went to pour her tea. She sat at the table sipping the hot sweet tea and looked at the papers. She had signed those papers out of love, a love that had been thrown back in her face. The promise she had made to the bank was connected to a promise she thought she had with her daughter. The promise that they were family, that they would always support each other. April had broken that promise. She had broken it in the cruelest way possible. And if that promise was broken, then what about the one on the paper? Her hand was steady as she picked up the phone book. She looked up the number for the bank's main office. She did not call the local branch. She called the corporate. The phone call headquarters. An operator answered, and Margaret's voice was calm and low. She said, "I need to speak to someone in your risk management department, please. It is about a high V-value mortgage I've co-signed." She was put on hold. The soft, boring music that played through the phone was a strange contrast to the storm in her soul. After a few minutes, a man's voice came on the line. He sounded professional and a little busy. "This is David in risk management. How can I help you?" Margaret took a deep breath. "Good morning, David. My name is Margaret Williams. I am calling about a loan. I am the guarantor for my daughter, April Williams." She gave him the loan number which she had read off the papers in front of her. "Yes, Mrs. Williams, I have the file here. Is there a problem?" Margaret looked at the picture of the little girl with pigtails on her wall. Then she closed her eyes. "Yes, David," she said, her voice perfectly even. "There is a problem. I am calling to officially withdraw my support as guarantor for this loan. There has been a complete and irreparable breakdown of my relationship with the primary borrower. The foundation of our agreement was based on mutual family support, and that support no longer exists." There was silence on the other end of the phone. David was likely not used to calls like this. "Ma'am, a guarantor agreement is a legal contract. You can't just withdraw." "I understand that," Margaret said calmly. But I am also obligated to inform you as the lender of a significant change in risk. The borrower's financial stability was approved based on my backing. I am now informing you that my backing is gone. Not just my financial backing, but all of it. She is on her own. I believe she obtained this loan under a false pretense. The pretense of a stable family support system that she herself has now destroyed. I consider her a high-risk borrower, and I felt it was my duty to inform the bank of this new and significant risk. David was quiet for another moment. Then his tone changed. It was more serious. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Mrs. Williams. A report of a high-risk change in circumstance is something we take very seriously. We will have to open an immediate review of the loan agreement and the borrower's standalone financial qualifications. This is a very serious matter. I know it is, Margaret said softly. Thank you for your time, David. She hung up the phone. She sat in the silence of her little house. There was no joy in what she had done, only a deep, aching sadness. But underneath the sadness, there was also a small, quiet sense of peace. She had not screamed or shouted. She had not made a scene. She had used her head. She had used her good name, the very thing she had worked her whole life to build in a new way. Not to build her daughter up, but to protect herself. April had wanted to get rid of her mother. She had thrown her out of her big fancy house and left their love lying on the ground. What April was about to find out was that her mother was the foundation, holding that entire house up, and the foundation had just been pulled away. The Monday after the party was a beautiful day. April woke up in her big soft bed. The sun streamed through the tall windows of her master bedroom, making patterns on the expensive wooden floor. She stretched like a cat, a smile on her face. The baby shower had been a huge success. Everyone had loved the house. Her fiancé, Michael, had been so proud. His parents had told her she had wonderful taste. Her boss had even sent a text that morning saying what a lovely time he'd had. April felt on top of the world. She had done it. She had the perfect life, the perfect house, the perfect fiancé, and a perfect baby on the way. She thought for a moment about her mother. A little wave of annoyance passed over her. It was so selfish of her mother to just show up like that, to try and ruin her perfect day. April had to do what she did. She had to protect their new life from her old one. Her mother just didn't understand. She was from a different time, a different world, a world of small houses and simple dresses. April's world was bigger now. It was better. She got out of bed and walked over to the large window, looking out over her perfect backyard. She will get over it, April said to herself. She always does. She spent the morning answering happy text messages and looking at pictures from the party that her friends had posted online. There she was, glowing, surrounded by well-dressed, important people. There were no pictures of an old woman in a cheap blue dress. No pictures of a homemade gift dropped on the steps. It was perfect. Just before noon, her phone. The bank call rang. She did not recognize the number, but it was from the same area code Asher Bank's main office. She figured it was just a sales call, maybe trying to sell her a new credit card. "Hello, this is April Williams," she answered, her voice bright and confident. "Good morning, Miss Williams. My name is David Miller. I'm calling from the risk management department at the bank." The man's voice was not friendly. It was not a sales call. It was flat and serious. April's smile faded a little. "Oh, is there a problem with my last payment?" "I'm sure it went through. Your payments are current, Miss Williams." David said that is not the issue. "The reason for my call is that the bank has received new information regarding the circumstances of your loan. Information that indicates a significant increase in the loan's risk profile. As a result, we are required to open an immediate and full review of your mortgage agreement." April felt a knot of confusion and fear tighten in her stomach. Risk? What are you talking about? What new information? Everything is fine. I am not at liberty to discuss the source of the information, Miss Williams, the man said, his voice like a stone wall. What I can tell you is that we need you to come into our main office this Friday. You will need to bring all of your financial documents, pay stubs, bank statements, tax returns for the past 3 years. We will need to reevaluate your qualifications for the loan based on your own income and credit without the support of the guarantor. The word hit her like a punch. The guarantor, my mother. Why without her? She co-signed. That was the whole deal. The guarantor has informed the bank that the relationship of trust and support upon which the guarantee was based no longer exists. David said, his words cold and clinical. We now have to view you as a standalone applicant. So Friday at 10 a.m. Please be on time and please bring all the requested documents. If you fail to appear or if the review finds you do not meet the bank's criteria on your own, we will have to move to the next stage, which could include calling the loan due. Calling the loan due, April whispered. The words made no sense. What does that mean? It means you would have to pay the full remaining amount of the mortgage immediately, or the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings on the property. We will send a formal letter outlining all of this. Have a good day, Miss Williams. The line went dead. April stood frozen in her beautiful sun-filled room, the phone still pressed to her ear. Foreclosure. The word echoed in the silent house. It was an ugly word, a poor person's word. It was not a word that belonged in her perfect life. It couldn't be real. It had to be a mistake. A horrible, crazy mistake. Her hands started to shake. She thought about the mortgage papers. She remembered, the banker telling her clear as day, "Your income alone is not enough to support this loan." She had needed her mother. She had needed her mother's perfect credit, her mother's paid-off house, her mother's lifetime of being responsible. It was her mother's good name that the bank had trusted, and her mother had taken it back. A hot, furious anger surged through her. How could she? How dare she? After everything April had done to build this life, April grabbed her phone, her fingers fumbling as she scrolled to her mother's name. She pressed the call button so hard the phone rang, thought the screen might crack. The phone rang once, twice. Hello. Margaret's voice was quiet, calm. It was the calmest sound April had ever heard, and it made her even more angry. What did you do? April screamed into the phone. There were no pleasantries, no hello. What did you do to me? There was a short pause on the other end of the line. April, is that you? I am not sure what you mean. The bank, April shrieked, pacing back and forth on her expensive rug. The bank called me. They are reviewing my loan. They are going to take my house. This is your fault. You did this. I did not call the bank to tell them to take your house, April, Margaret said, her voice still quiet and even. There was no anger in it, only a deep, unmovable sadness. I called the bank to tell them the truth. The truth? What truth? That you are a hateful old woman who wants to ruin her daughter's life? No, April, Margaret said, and for the first time there was a little bit of steel in her voice. The truth that you told me on Saturday, you told me I was an embarrassment. You told me to get off your property. You made it very clear that you did not want me in your life. So I took myself out of it all the way out. That includes my name on your papers, my good name that you were so ashamed of. April stopped pacing. Her mother's words were so simple, so logical that it knocked the breath out of her. But you can't do that. It's not fair. I need that loan. This is my home. The baby's home. I know, Margaret said softly. It is a beautiful home. A home you could not have bought without me. A home you threw me out of. April's anger started to crumble, replaced by a cold, rising panic. She was in real trouble. This was not a small fight she could win by yelling. "Mom, please," she said, her voice changing from a scream to a desperate whine. "You have to call them back. Tell them it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. I was just stressed from the party. You know how I get. I know how you get, April," Margaret said, but this was different. "What you said, the look on your face, you meant it. You were ashamed of me." "No, I wasn't." April's mind raced, trying to find the right words to fix this, but all her words felt like lies. "April," Margaret said, her voice gentle again, "you cannot have it both ways. You cannot have my help but not have me. You cannot use my good name to buy your fancy house and then throw me out of it because I am not fancy enough for your friends. Life does not work that way. My name, my support, my love. It is a whole package. You threw the whole package away on Saturday. Not me, you." Tears started to stream down April's face. These were not angry tears. They were tears of pure fear. "So what am I supposed to do?" she cried. "I'm going to lose everything." "I don't know what you were going to do," Margaret said. And the sadness in her voice was so deep, it seemed to fill the phone line. "You are a smart girl, April. You have a big job. You have a fiancé. I am sure you will figure something out. You have to stand on your own 2 feet now." The finality in her mother's voice was terrifying. April realized her mother was not going to fix this. There was no magic wand. There was only the cold, hard consequence of her own actions. "I have to go now, April," Margaret said. "I am getting ready for my Bible study group. You take care of yourself and my grandchild." And then, just like the man from the bank, she hung up. April was left alone in the beautiful, silent house that was no longer hers. For a few hours, April sat on her expensive sofa in her perfect living room, surrounded by silence. The happy glow of the party was gone. The beautiful house no longer felt like a castle. It felt like a trap. Every beautiful thing she looked at: the crystal vase on the table. The silk curtains on the windows seemed to mock her. They were all things she could not afford. They were props in a life that was not real. A life built on a lie she had told herself. The lie was that she was better than where she came from. The lie was that her mother, Margaret, was a part of a past she needed to escape. Now that past was the only thing that had been holding her up, and she had kicked it away with her own 2 feet. Her first thought was Michael, her fiancé. He would fix this. He was smart. He was successful. He loved her. She called him, her voice shaking. "Michael, we have a problem. A huge problem." She explained the call from the bank, the words tumbling out of her mouth in a messy, panicked rush. She told him what her mother had done. She waited for him to say, "Don't worry, darling. We'll figure this out together," but he did not say that. There was a long, cold silence on the other end of the phone. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. It was the voice of a businessman looking at a bad investment. "So let me get this straight," he said slowly. "You can't actually afford this house on your own." "No, but we can't afford it together, right?" "With your salary," the voice of a businessman, April began, her voice hopeful. "The agreement was that you would handle the mortgage, April." He cut her off. "My parents helped with the down payment as a gift to you based on the understanding that you were financially secure. You told me your mother was co-signing as a formality. You never said you were completely dependent on her." I didn't think it mattered," April stammered. "It matters," he said, and the coldness in his voice was terrifying. "It matters a great deal. I have an image to maintain. My family has a reputation. Being engaged to a woman who is about to be foreclosed on. That's not a good look, April. It's an embarrassment." The word hit her like a physical blow. Embarrassment. It was the same word she had used about her own mother. Now it was being used on her. She felt sick. "Michael, please," she begged. "Don't do this. I love you. We're having a baby. This changes things." He said, "I need perfect fiancé" was gone some time to think, to reevaluate. He did not say he loved her back. He did not ask about the baby. He just said he needed to reevaluate. And then he hung up. April knew what that meant. It was over. Perfect fiancé was gone. The next few days were a nightmare. April went to the bank on Friday. She walked in wearing her most expensive suit, trying to look confident, but she felt like a little girl who had been called to the principal's office. She sat across the desk from David Miller, the man from the phone. He was not mean. He was just professional. He looked at her papers, at her income, and at the massive number of the mortgage. He did not need a calculator to know the truth. "Miss Williams," he said, looking at her with something like pity. "As you can see, your income covers your basic living expenses and your car payment, but it does not come close to supporting a mortgage. Of this size, you were only approved because of your mother's guarantee. Without it, you are not a viable candidate for this loan." "I'm very sorry." April just nodded. There was nothing to say. The numbers did not lie. The bank gave her 30 days. 30 days to somehow come up with the full amount of the loan, or they would take the house. It was an impossible task. She was trapped. That night she sat alone in the huge dark house. The electricity was still on, but it felt like the power had been cut. She walked from room to room, touching the walls. This was her dream, and it had turned into a prison. She ended up in the nursery. The room was painted a soft, gentle pink. A beautiful, expensive crib stood in the corner. Her friends had given her so many wonderful gifts. Tiny designer baby clothes, a silver rattle, everything a baby could ever want. But as she stood there, she knew the most important thing was missing. It was not something you could buy. It was the yellow hand-knitted blanket her mother had tried to give her. She closed her eyes and saw it again. The look on her mother's face, the hope and love in her eyes, and then the hurt, the deep, soul-crushing hurt, when April had told her to leave. She saw the gift falling to the ground, a symbol of her mother's love discarded on the cold stone. And, for the first time, April did not cry for her house, or for her fiancé, or for herself. She cried for her mother. She cried for the pain she had caused. She had been so busy building a life that looked good on the outside, she had let the inside turn rotten. The next morning, she woke up and knew what she had to do. She packed a small bag just like her mother had. She did not pack her fancy clothes. She packed a pair of jeans and a simple sweater. She called a real estate agent and told them to put the house on the market for a fast sale to pay back the bank. She left the key under the mat. She did not look back. She got into her car and she started to drive. She was driving north, a 600-mile drive. The journey was long and quiet. She did not play the radio. She just drove and she thought. She thought about her childhood. She remembered her mother working 2 jobs to buy her a bicycle for Christmas. She remembered her mother staying up all night with her when she had a fever. She remembered 1,000 small acts of love, 1,000 sacrifices she had taken for granted. She had traded all of that for a man who left her when things got hard, and a house she could not keep. The shame was so heavy it felt like a physical weight in the car with her. It was late in the evening when she finally pulled onto her mother's street. The small, simple houses looked warm and inviting under the streetlights. They did not look poor or embarrassing. They looked like homes, real homes. She parked her car and walked up the short walkway to her mother's front door. The porch light was on. She took a deep, shaky breath and knocked. She heard footsteps and the door opened. There was Margaret. She was in her bathrobe, her hair in a simple braid. She looked tired, but her face was calm. When she saw April, her eyes widened in surprise. She did not look angry. She just looked sad. April could not hold it in anymore. The tears she'd been fighting for hours finally broke free. "Mama," she sobbed, the word catching in her throat. "Mama, I am so sorry. I am so sorry." She fell into her mother's arms, crying like she had. Margaret held her, not cried since she was a little girl. She was not a fancy manager anymore. She was just a daughter who had hurt her mother and had come home. Margaret held her. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not say anything about the house or the bank or the fiancé. She just held her daughter on the front porch of her small, humble house and gently patted her back. After a long moment, she led April inside out of the cold night air. She sat April down at the small kitchen table, the same table where she had signed the papers, the same table where she had made the call to the bank. She put the kettle on to make tea. The house was warm. It smelled of cinnamon and love. "The house is gone," April whispered, looking down at her hands. "Michael is gone. Everything is gone." Margaret placed a cup of hot tea in front of her. She sat down and put her warm, wrinkled hand over April's cold own. "No, baby," she said, her voice soft and full of a love that April now knew was the most valuable thing in the world. "Not everything is gone." April looked up, her eyes full of tears, and met her mother's gaze. In her mother's eyes, she did not see a poor, embarrassing old woman. She saw her home. She saw strength. She saw forgiveness. She saw a love so strong it could withstand even the deepest hurt. The big house was gone. The fancy life was a ghost. But sitting there in her mother's small, warm kitchen, April knew she had not lost everything. She had just found her way back to the only thing that had ever really mattered. The hot tea warmed April's hands, but it was the quiet, steady presence of her mother that began to thaw the ice around her heart. They sat in the comfortable silence of the small kitchen for a long time. There were no sounds from a big city outside, only the gentle ticking of the clock on the wall and the whisper of the wind in the old oak tree in the yard. For April, the silence was not empty. It was full of everything she had thrown away and had now by some miracle been given a chance to find again. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice as soft as her touch. "Why, April? Why were you so ashamed of me?" There was no anger in the question, only a deep motherly need to understand the heart of her child. April looked up from her cup, tears welling in her eyes again. She had to be honest. No more lies. No more pretending. "I was a fool, Mama," she whispered. "I got so lost. I met Michael, I started to believe, and his family. They have so much. Their houses are like museums. Their friends are all so important. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to fit in so badly. I started to believe that the things we had, the life you gave me, was not enough." She lowered her head in shame. "When I saw you at the door in your nice blue dress, all I could see was that it wasn't a designer dress. I saw your old car down the street, not a fancy new one, and I panicked. I thought they would all laugh at me. I thought they would see that I wasn't really one of them, that I was just a fake, and I was so cruel. I turned you into the thing I was scared of being." Margaret listened, her face full of a deep and painful understanding. She nodded slowly. "So you threw me out to prove you belonged in their world." "Yes," April choked out. "And it was the stupidest, most hateful thing I have ever done. Their world is empty. Mama, when the trouble came, Michael didn't hold my hand. He called me an embarrassment and walked away. The big house wasn't a home. It was just a pile of bricks that I couldn't afford. The only real thing in my whole life was you and your love. And I threw it on the ground." Margaret took her hand and squeezed it gently. "We all make mistakes, baby girl. We all get lost sometimes. The important thing is finding your way back home." And that's what April did. She stayed. The next day, Margaret helped her move her things into her old childhood bedroom. The room was small with a single bed and a small desk. The walls were still painted a pale yellow, the color April had chosen when she was 12. In the closet were some of her old high school yearbooks and a box of old photographs. It was nothing like the huge fancy master bedroom in the city, but as April sat on the bed that night, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. She was not pretending anymore. She was just April, Margaret's daughter. And for the first time, in a long time, that felt like enough. The days turned into weeks. Life was simple. Margaret would wake up early and make breakfast. They would eat together at the small kitchen table. April, used to rushing out the door with a cup of coffee, learned to sit and talk. She learned to listen. She helped Margaret in the garden, feeling the good, honest dirt under her fingernails. She went with her mother to the grocery store where people would stop and say hello to Margaret, not because she was important, but because she was kind. They were friendly to April, too. No one cared what kind of car she drove or what brand her clothes were. They just smiled and asked how she was feeling. One afternoon, April was resting on the sofa when Margaret came into the room. She was holding something in her hands. It was a soft bundle wrapped in plain white tissue paper. She sat down next to April and placed it gently on her lap. "I went back the next day," Margaret said quietly. "After the party, I couldn't. I went back the next day, leave it there on the ground." April's hands trembled as she unwrapped the paper. Inside was the yellow hand-knitted baby blanket. It was a little dusty, but it was still perfect. Every stitch was still full of love. April held it to her cheek. It was the softest thing she had ever felt. The tears that came now were not of sadness or fear, but of gratitude. "I didn't know if you would still want it," Margaret said. "I want it more than anything," April cried, hugging the blanket to her chest. "Thank you, Mama. Thank you for saving it." "Of course I saved it," Margaret said, putting her arm around her daughter's shoulders. "It belongs to my grandbaby." As the months passed, April's pregnant belly grew, and so did the bond between mother and daughter. It grew stronger than it had ever been. April went to all her doctor's appointments, and Margaret was always there, sitting in the waiting room, ready with a smile and a snack. When April felt the baby kick for the first time, she grabbed her mother's hand and placed it on her stomach, and they shared the magic of the moment together, their faces lit with joy. April started to laugh again, a real genuine laugh that came from her heart. She was learning that a life filled with love was worth more than a life filled with things. The day the baby came, it was a quiet Tuesday morning. Margaret drove April to the hospital, holding her hand the whole way. In the delivery room, there was no fiancé in an expensive suit. There was just her mother whispering words of encouragement, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth and telling her how strong she was. And then a new sound filled the room. The cry of a healthy baby girl. The nurses cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a standard hospital blanket, but Margaret had brought the yellow one with her. With a tearful smile, she gently unwrapped her new granddaughter and wrapped her again in the soft, sunny blanket she had knitted with so much love, and for a short time, so much pain. She placed the baby in April's arms. April looked down at her daughter, so small and perfect, warm and safe in the blanket, made by her grandmother's loving hands. The baby had her mother's eyes and her grandmother's peaceful spirit. April looked up at Margaret, her heart so full of love, it felt like it would burst. "She's beautiful, Mama," April whispered. Margaret smiled, tears of joy running down her cheeks. "Yes, she is. She is our new beginning." In that small hospital room, surrounded not by wealth or status, but by a love that had been broken and then made whole again, April, in that small hospital room, finally understood a home was not made of brick and wood. It was made of love. A family was not about looking good to the outside world. It was about holding each other up on the inside. Her daughter, wrapped in the love of 2 generations, was the most valuable thing she would ever hold. And that was a truth more beautiful than any fancy house, and more precious than any amount of money in the world. Dear viewers, we've come to the end of Margaret and April's journey, a story that shows us how quickly a person can get lost when they start chasing the world's approval, and how powerful a mother's love is on the journey back home. April thought that a big house and fancy friends would make her happy. but she learned a very hard lesson. She forgot that the foundation of her life was not built on money or status, but on the simple, steady love of the mother she tried to throw away. This story is a reminder to us all. Never, ever be ashamed of the hands that raised you or the home you came from. True wealth is not in your bank account. It is in the hearts of the family that loves you. Pride can build a beautiful house, but only humility and love can make it a home. What did you learn from Margaret and April's story? And what do you think is the most valuable lesson a child can learn from a parent? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one and your wisdom inspires us. If this story touched your heart, please show your support with a thumbs up. Share it with your friends and family and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next story.